Brothers and sisters, it's been a couple months since my last video, but as I've been checking on once in a while, I noticed that this year, at the end of 2021, I reached 100 subscribers on the channel, which is pretty awesome. So I really did feel compelled to come back and start making more videos. So I wanted to share from the lives of saints. Of course, if you've watched any of my videos, the lives of saints are very important to us as Orthodox Christians. So I want to share from the life of a modern saint, Saint Paisios. And he was a saint that only died in 1994. And he's known for being a very discerning and clairvoyant elder who lived on Mount Athos and who helped lots of pilgrims who came to him. But something interesting about his life is that he served in the Greek Civil War, which was immediately after World War II, when there was a power vacuum in the country of Greece, and there was a war between the communists and the other people, whether they were maybe for the king or for democracy or for anything other than communism. And he served in the Greek army, fighting against the communists, of course. And he was a radio operator, and that's just even one interesting thing to note right there, that although he was like a foot soldier, he wasn't actually shooting guns at people, which was something that was important to him because he didn't want to kill anyone, because he wanted to become a monk, and he didn't want that on his conscience, and he didn't want that on his soul. And actually, even after the Civil War and he became a monk, he never became a priest, and one of the reasons that he gave was because he didn't want to become a priest in the case that it would be an offense to God because he had killed someone during the war. The reason I want to share this is because I think it's actually something we can learn a lot from. And I have this book here, which is called With Pain and Love for Contemporary Man, and it's the first of a series of books about the councils of Saint Paisios. And so it's recorded sayings and counsels from him by people who were close to him during his life and were able to write things down or tape record, and they were able to make it into a book and translate into English so that any Orthodox Christian can read and benefit from it today. So I would recommend you this book, and this is what I'll be reading from today. Well, obviously this book is just filled with meaningful things that I could share with you, because Saint Paisios wouldn't say something or share something with the people who talked with him or asked him questions if he didn't think that it would be spiritually meaningful or spiritually helpful to them. So we know anything we read in this is going to be pretty insightful into the spiritual life of Orthodox Christians. But the reason I specifically wanted to share about the things he had to say from his time in the service, which was 3.5 years he served in the army, the reason I wanted to share that was because I think there's even more we can take from those passages, and they're even more interesting to me and hopefully you guys as well, because from there we can learn history, we can learn about the history of Greece, we can learn about the Greek Civil War and Greece at that time, as well as we can learn about culture. We can learn about what the people of Greece were thinking about the war, what they were thinking about serving in the army, or about the communists, or about what their conscience was like at that time. Also, we can learn about what it's like to be at war and what it's like to be in the army. Obviously, the world is a very not peaceful place, and wars are things that happen, and it's really interesting to read what a saint has to say about his own experience in war and his own experience in the army. And finally, of course, the most important, we can learn about the spiritual aspects of these things. And we can really take these things that he says about that time, and we can apply it to ourselves and our own spiritual lives. So let's jump in. So on page 273 of this book, Saint Paisios is recorded saying, "I remember in the army There were all kinds of urgent needs. Every time something would come up, the men would say, "Sir, let me go on this mission. This other man is married, he has children. It would be a pity for his children to be left without a father." There they were, asking the commander to send them to the front lines. They found joy in the idea of getting killed so that others with children would not have to die and leave their children without a father. I can't imagine anyone making this kind of sacrifice today. It would be a rare thing. He continues saying, "Once we had ran out of water. The commander located the area on the map where we could find water, but the communist guerrilla fighters were there. There is water somewhere near, but it is very dangerous. Who will go to fill some canteens? It will have to be done in the dark." One man came forward immediately. "I will go, sir." Another followed, then another. Everybody wanted to go. It was going to be a night mission in the dark, a dangerous one. "You cannot all go," the commander said. No one thought of himself in that situation. You did not hear the men saying, "Sir, my foot is hurting," or "I have a headache," or "I am tired." Everybody wanted to go, even though it would put their lives at risk. He continues saying, "These days there's a lukewarm spirit. There's no manliness, no sacrifice. We think with a faulty logic that has turned everything upside down. You see, in the past, men would go voluntarily to serve in the army. Today they will do anything to get an exemption. They will go to a doctor to diagnose themselves as mentally ill. They will try all kinds of tricks to avoid the draft. This was unheard of in the old days. In our unit, we had a 23-year-old lieutenant, young but very brave. One day his father, a retired army officer, called him. He said that he was planning to use his influence to have him relocated from the front lines to the rear. The lieutenant became very upset. "Shame on you, father, for saying such a thing. Only drones do nothing." His honesty, candor, bravery exceeded all bounds. He was always the first to get to the front line. His greatcoat was full of bullet holes, but he was still alive. When he was discharged, he took the greatcoat with him as a souvenir. End quote. So from this passage, one thing I noticed that I think is the main theme here is that St. Paisios is saying that the generation of those who were willing to fight for their country against the communists in the Greek Civil War was a generation that had a great spirit of sacrifice. But he's also saying that our generation, the new generation, which would be me and probably you as well, is lacking the spirit of sacrifice. And that's very problematic because the spirit of sacrifice is one of the central things to Christianity. And you can see that from the most founding principle of Christianity, which is Christ's sacrifice for us on the cross. Just as Christ picked up his cross, we also have to learn how to pick up our crosses and make our sacrifices to make ourselves closer to Christ and to make our communities closer to Christ as well, just as these men were doing. It's pretty inspiring to read about the sacrifices that these men made, such as volunteering to go out on a dangerous mission, which all of them did, when the sacrifices we make in our world are hardly comparable. Maybe it's pausing our online game when our parents call us, or maybe the greatest sacrifice you had to make this past month was staying in to study instead of going out for a test. But the thing is, those aren't necessarily Christian sacrifices. And you can see how in the passage, not only are the men making sacrifices, but they're not thinking about themselves when they do it. They're thinking about others. For example, they said they found joy in the idea of getting killed so that others who had children would not have to die and leave their children without a father. So they're thinking about others people's scenario, and they're willing to put themselves out there and make their sacrifice so that the kids won't be left without a father. And that's the mark of a true Christian, and that's the things that we read about in the lives of the saints. And so something that we have to do as a generation is learn what it takes to make a meaningful sacrifice and what type of sacrifices are needed for us to become closer to Christ. And the thing about reading this is we're probably not ever going to be in this exact scenario where we find ourselves in the army and we find ourselves being asked to volunteer for a dangerous mission. So we have to learn about how we can apply what St. Paisios told us into our own life. So we can do this by really taking a look at the virtues which the saint exemplifies in this passage. And obviously there's the spirit of sacrifice, which I already explained is like so important to the spiritual life and to the worldly life as well. But the other one that he talks about indirectly is fulfilling our duties. And there's lots of things that just by nature of who we are, there's things that we're called to do in that position. And running away from them or trying to use different influences or cleverness to get out of them is not something very honorable to St. Paisios and not something that brings us closer to Christ. Another virtue that he uses this word a couple of times and also describes it indirectly is bravery. And even though our bravery probably will not be being expressed in the same context as these soldiers here, we can still cultivate bravery in our hearts and in our souls for the battles we may have to fight in our worldly lives and of course the battles in our spiritual life. So I hope you enjoyed this passage about the Greek Civil War. I'll definitely read more from this book and from the other books that are part of this series as I have time. And I hope that you learned about the great importance of the spirit of sacrifice. And just as Christ's sacrifice on the cross led to the resurrection, and just as these men's sacrifice in the Civil War led to a Greece that was not under communist rule, in the same way, our sacrifices will lead to joys as well, and lead to us being more spiritually pure. So thanks for watching.